To a classic water cooler conversation that's happening here in South Africa, and that's the cost of airfares. We're in the last quarter of the year. Many of us considering a holiday over the festive season. Air tickets are usually high during peak seasons. We know this, but there is real concern that with the demise of Comair in particular, we could be in for astronomical fares. Let's discuss this now with aviation analyst Des Latham. Hello, Des. So there's lots of anecdotal evidence that prices are even higher than they might normally be as we start going into peak booking. What is your assessment of the prices and what they're doing? Des, I think you might have muted yourself.
I did. Apologies. Thank you, Sally, and thanks for having me. It's been a long day. I was in Australia this morning, so I'm a bit jet lagged. I just arrived back here, and now I've got a bit of information about international airfares as well at the moment.
Fantastic.
But I mean, yes, you're right. The prices are higher than they were 2 years ago and a year ago. There's a combination effect. One is the rand. It's collapsed virtually against the dollar, and 75% of the running costs of airlines are on fuel and dollars, basically. So you combine that with a drop-off of two airlines, Comair and SAA, for competition's sakes, and you have a problem. Plus, you have the increased number of people flying post-COVID. So you have three things simultaneously driving prices. But I just look now, if you're willing to book a flight a few months early, I looked at March, and you may laugh, but back in the day, that's what we used to do. The price is around 2,400 return Cape Town. If you try and do it now, it's around 6,000. So you can see that it's a matter of organizing yourself, planning ahead, and then buying your tickets as early as possible. But yes, the prices are higher than average.
We know that the Competition Commission is looking into this to see if there's any sort of taking advantage beyond the very real problems that you've mentioned, which is the fact that our rand is not buying in fuel cheaply enough because it's not as strong as it used to be, and also fuel is more expensive than it was a year ago, plus, Comair, COVID, etc. What for you would be the red flags that there's a bit more going on, that there's a bit of an attempt to take advantage? I think it's called price gouging.
Surge pricing given to us by Uber et al. Yes, there is a propensity to drive prices, but you must see there is a limit to that as well because of our economy. Our middle class has taken quite a hit over the last few years, and there is a limit to what airlines can charge. And airline business is volume. So as volume goes up and demand goes up simultaneously, then the price will go up naturally. It used to be that airlines were licensed to print money, but that was in the 70s and 80s. It doesn't happen anymore. It's very, very pricey to run an airline, particularly in Southern Africa, where our economy is battling quite a bit, strong headwinds at the moment. So there is a propensity to drive pricing like this with any other business, especially in transport. But the running costs, the input costs are very high on airlines.
You mentioned surge pricing, and you know, I think what happens when you try and order an Uber at midnight on New Year's Eve is a classic example. There's just such huge demand. That's how capitalism works, supply and demand. Is there anything inherently wrong with prices pushing up when there's huge demand? Isn't that just the way of the world?
Yes, and I've got bad news for everyone who thinks it's just in South Africa. I mean, in America, 10,000 flights have been cancelled over the last year because of a lack of aircrew, for example, and problems with circulating planes. In Australia, where I've just come back from, many people have stopped trying to fly from Melbourne to Sydney, which is basically an 800-kilometre drive, and are driving that. They are flying to secondary airports, and in fact, on charter and secondary charter flights that are triple the price they were a year ago. And it's around the world that this has happened. So we look at ourselves and say, okay, look, the rand is weak, and Comair is gone, and so we're being screwed, to use a phrase. But we're not. The bottom line here is that the business is expensive to run, and around the world there's been a surge in demand of aircrew, of ATC, you name it. All the costs, the input costs have rocketed, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine hasn't helped matters. That's pushed the oil price. And now with Saudi Arabia and Russia et al. Deciding that they're going to fix the price and drop production, our input costs are going up again in the airline business. So around the world, the costs are rising, and you just have to plan better. Be adult about it. Don't think you can drop everything and fly to Cape Town like back in the day, from 2 3 years ago. You can't do that anymore. You have to plan. If you've got a family of 4 and you're flying to Cape Town and you're trying to book now, you're looking at 30,000 Rand minimum return. So you fly in March, that's going to cost you 12.
So you're saying that if you haven't booked your December holiday family tickets to Cape Town, you are going to be paying astronomical prices, because October seems quite early for a lot of us. But you're saying you've probably missed the boat or the plane if you haven't booked those December tickets by now.
Well, I've looked at some of the prices, not as high as if you booked for next week, obviously, but it's a time of the year where there is a demand. So people have booked ahead. They booked their grandmothers to fly up to Johannesburg, for example, from Port Elizabeth, and those kind of secondary flights. And then the main flights, the high capacity flights, which is between Cape Town and Johannesburg, which is still one of the busiest air corridors in the world, is rapidly filling up. So, no, you can still get good deals, but you're going to have to fly on odd days. Some people I know like flying on New Year's Day because the prices are half, pretty much, and Christmas Day simultaneously. So you're going to have to look at changing the way in which you were planning. If you're looking at flying just before the 16th of December, you're going to be paying quite a premium there because everyone wants to fly just before the 16th and back and around the first week of January. So try and find another time. Change your holiday period if you can.
And, we used to think, we used to these fantastic sort of fire sales where you'd spend like 300 Rand and everyone would wait for midnight and quickly log on and get those fantastic deals. Is our understanding of what a cheap flight is also going to have to change? I mean, what is a really good deal in today's market for a return ticket to Cape Town, say?
Well, 2,300 Rand right now if you book for March. That's a pretty good deal. And that's, if you go back a couple of years, that's not too bad based on what we're seeing now. I mean, it's about 200 or 300 Rand more than you would have paid then. So it's still not too bad. No, I think there is an opportunity for low-cost airlines to nudge in here. I think that some of these airlines that are flying at the moment, they're flying the Airbus, for example, or the Boeing and those kind of planes. You can see that there's going to be a change in the kind of aircraft used. The Embraer is much lower cost to operate. It has a few number of seats, but it is less than a third of the price of an Airbus to operate, and so on. So you're going to see that there will be competitors. You see, right, well, we can line up 5 or 6 Embraers or Bombardiers, which is a twin-engine turbo plane that flies to, for example, to Botswana and back. And you'll maybe fly a little slower, but you pay a lot less. So those kind of operators will pop up quite quickly now, I think.
Okay, so that's interesting. And obviously you know a lot about planes, and I know virtually nothing. You said an embryo. So is that a slower aeroplane, or is it a smaller aeroplane? Is it more fuel efficient?
It's an Embraer. It's a Brazilian design plane. And we fly them around at the moment. There are flights you can take on Airlink that uses them, for example. And it's a safe plane. It's been flying around the world for decades. And it takes 30 seats or so, or 27, depending on your setup. So that's the kind of smaller route. But you can imagine someone who gets a number of those planes flying Cape Town. No, it doesn't fly much slower than the Airbus, and it flies at the same altitude. So it's just a matter of squeezing people in. But if you have a lower cost item, such as you have with those planes, you will be competitive on the routes where people are paying 6,000 Rand each. Return to Cape Town suddenly becomes feasible to operate this smaller kind of airlines. So I think your question about low-cost airlines, there is an opportunity here for an entrepreneur to jump in and say, okay, this is how we're going to go in volume, and you can take a chance, and we're going to run these kind of planes that are more viable, and they have a better endurance, and they're easier, and they're lower fuel burn per hour. So I'm speculating here. I don't know anything specifically, but I would imagine that there would be entrepreneurs thinking about this. Already we have Comair and FlySafair and Airlink purchasing these smaller planes or leasing them and flying them already in Southern Africa. So it's going to grow. That market will grow.
So why did Comair go bang if there is such a gap left in the market? What are the lessons that we have to learn from this?
Well, I'm going to go out on a limb here to some extent and be careful what I say, but let's just put it this way. The board made a number of serious mistakes. The board took over. It was a basic logistics company that took over through Bidvest. and made some shambolic decisions, to be blunt, about how to run an airline. It was run previously by people who didn't always take home a return on investment, a dividend. They bought into aviation as a goal and as a mission, if you like, as a dream. Whereas when the company was sold over the years, the shareholding changed to people who really just wanted the money. They weren't that interested in the airline business as a business. They were more interested in the cash as a cash. And they made some horrendous mistakes when it came to moving the maintenance, the planned maintenance, to Lufthansa, which is in euros instead of rands, from SAA, after SAA failed to pay a 700 million rand fine for abusing the monopoly back a few years ago now. And then they made errors when it came to hedging fuel price. And a lot of airlines, or most airlines, make money out of fuel hedging, which is they buy ahead and they bet basically on the cost of fuel going forward. And they made some mistakes, some fundamental mistakes. So that's a triplicate there for Comair. There are other things, but those are the three main things that led to stumbling, I'm afraid.
Yeah, so if you're going to venture into the low-cost airline market, you've really got to understand the market, is what I'm hearing you saying. But just as we close, is it possible to predict when airline prices are going to stabilise, or is it just impossible because of what is happening in the war in Ukraine? And just recap once more what your tips are for getting the best deal at this time of year.
Good question. No, the prices will go back and stabilize, but we're looking at 2 years minimum. And that's what IATA says. And they've been quite accurate up to now. They were hopelessly optimistic a couple of years ago during the first phase of the lockdown. So advice number one, book 3 to 5 months ahead, easily. If you are going to go in a crisis thing, put money aside. You're going to have to sell the car, or you're going to have to make an arrangement to pay more. And that's not going to go away in the short term. Look at alternative flights. People are so used to FlySafair. There are alternatives to FlySafair, and they are getting more and more competitive. The bottom line here is nothing is going to make these prices come down in the short term. All the surge price areas of Easter, middle of the year, all the school holidays, those kind of periods, you've got to fly outside of those periods. And that's not just in South Africa that's happening. As I said, I just returned from Australia. They have school holidays there. Exactly the same thing happened there, with the costs rocketing sometimes 300% on flights, and people were just getting in cars and driving thousands of kilometers. So that's the bottom line here. Book early.
Thank you so much for chatting to us this evening. And if you haven't booked your December tickets, Des is basically saying it's a bit too late to get anything vaguely reasonable at this point. That's aviation analyst Des Latham.